You get strong on thoughts left in your head.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Health Go Live webinar series. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Oracle. Just a few housekeeping items to go over. We would like to remind everyone that the Q&A feature will be available, so feel free to send in those questions for the panelists throughout the discussion. Stay on for expert mixologist Natasha, who will be shaking things up with a refreshing cocktail demonstration. And with that, I'll throw it over to our moderator, who joins us from Deloitte, Tejas Desai.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. This is Tejas Desai. I'm a partner in Deloitte's healthcare technology practice. Excited to be here. We've got a esteemed set of panelists here that I'd like to have them introduce themselves as well. Beth, would you like to go first?
Sure, thanks for having me. I'm Beth Neal, I'm from Anthem, and I'm Vice President of Enterprise Shared Solutions. So I have numerous responsibilities that cross across the enterprise, both on the government and the commercial space. David?
Sure, hey guys, I'm Dave Wethington from Clover Health. I am Senior Vice President of Plan Operations, so focusing on most shared solutions, clinical programs. And my focus has been in the health plan industry, has been mostly on government programs, so Medicare, Medicaid, and fee-for-service Medicare.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Akshay Kapoor. I'm from Oracle. I head the billing practice at Oracle Financial Services. We have been in the industry for now about 20 plus years, and we are sort of household name when it comes to billing in the healthcare space. Happy to be on this. Thanks, Tejas. Thanks, Health Partners, for getting us here.
Great. All right, we're going to get started. As mentioned earlier, we have a series of questions that I'll be sharing with this panel, but if you do have topics that you'd like to cover, feel free to put it in the chat window. I will be looking at those as well. All right, we're going to get started. So we're going to start with really the topic that's on everyone's mind around COVID. And just want to understand, what are some of the challenges that your organizations are navigating through with COVID as it relates to billing, and how you're looking to address them? Beth, would you like to go first?
Sure. So when COVID hit, what we immediately started to focus on was monitoring our receivables and looking at our cash flow cycles. And at Anthem, which is probably not unlike other companies, we actually have multiple billing systems. And so trying to monitor all the different billing systems and the receivables and the cash flow coming in was definitely a challenging understatement. And then we moved into the phase of, okay, now we need to look at our delinquency process and the communications that are going out, because there were many states that I'm sure y'all probably experienced where they were mandating extensions of payments for clients. And so we needed to have a way to suppress our process so that we weren't accidentally sending out delinquency notices prematurely that would be against the regulations. So we quickly had to pivot to that focus. And then lastly, what I would say is that, because of the COVID situation and the decrease of claims and experience that our members and clients were experiencing, Anthem made a decision to provide a premium credit back. And so then we needed to do some analysis of who would qualify for the premium credit, and then actually how to actually get the premium credit onto the bill, both at the member and the client level. So those were kind of some of the major milestones that we've been going through. And I would just say again, with having the many systems and some of them being very old systems, doing the simplest thing about giving a premium credit, was very monumental and sometimes took several months of planning to get it in place. So those were some of the things that we experienced.
Absolutely. Thank you, Beth. Dave, do you want to share some of your perspective on this?
Yeah. I sort of agree with everything Beth said. I think we've all probably had some of the same headaches. dealing with this. A lot of our membership is in, we're Medicare Advantage only, Clover Health is in northern New Jersey, and central New Jersey, which was one of the earliest hotspots for COVID. So back in March, early April, I mean, we were literally concerned that the facilities treating many of our members wouldn't have enough staff to function, would be completely overwhelmed, right? So the first sort of human thing in Anthem, everybody took steps, was to sort of suspend a lot of the administrative requirements for these facilities because they frankly just didn't have administrative staff there. But by the same token, right, not everybody's a good actor all the time. And even sometimes people's intentions are good. Mistakes can get made. There are a lot of changes around Medicare billing for COVID. And if you apply a COVID diagnosis, bonus payments and things like that. So for us, the challenge was sort of walking a fine line between relieving a lot of administrative burden, right, and not wanting to make life more complicated for people. But we still needed to manage sort of fraud, waste, and abuse at the same time. So for us, it was a lot of sort of daily decision making, almost kind of like they're doing about opening schools or opening restaurants, is like sort of how much should we pull back from our standard process? When should we begin to reapply our standard process? How do you sort of handle exceptions in case by case basis? So on the claims billing side, there was a lot of both education needed for our providers on what we would and wouldn't allow based on changes that Medicare was making, right? What tests would be free of charge, things like that. We also on our enrollment side, so most of our plans are zero premium or very low premium already. So it's less an issue with premium reimbursements. We have a frail and elderly population generally. And the reality is we for several months in the spring, we're running at 350 to 400% our average annual mortality. And for those of you who haven't worked with Medicare enrollment, sort of updates about enrollment status come through Social Security if there's a death. So you actually have a really significant lag time. So I guess it's a little bit less about billing and enrollment to some degree, but one of the challenges for us was trying to work with Medicare to get timely information, frankly, so we knew who we needed to aggressively be reaching out to in these sort of vulnerable areas, and realistically who had passed away, right? Who was no longer an active member. So that's not where the resources should be going.
Yep, great point. Thank you, David. Actually, from a product perspective, how does this change your roadmap? And how does the functionality that Beth and David talked about? How did that impact ORMB?
Yeah, so Tejas, what happens is like, what Beth covered about the legacy system, the problems that it was posing, or what David covered from the perspective of regular updates from the Medicare system to understand. One thing that we can establish is you need to be nimble, right? The decision making was very, very fast. You needed to be creative, right? Like David mentioned about how do you walk the fine line between being able to anticipate the fraud versus making sure there's no administrative burden, right? You needed to be dynamic, right? This is an election year. Not only the COVID thing is happening, but also you are anticipating what may happen in the future policy changes. I think the biggest thing that from Oracle perspective, right, that we bring to the table is the whole configuration versus coding and the whole manual processes, etc. We have built a system that helps healthcare companies to be able to build in a consolidated system across whether it is government plans or self-funded or fully funded. I'll give you one interesting fact that I was talking to one of the colleagues in the healthcare space. She mentioned that, look, when the COVID struck, what people didn't realize for many of the payer companies, when the interest rates went down, that also impacted the income for healthcare payer companies because there was a interest coming into the company's revenue. Now, when that dried up, the other thing that came up was the whole focus on revenue. So Beth covered that from that perspective, the whole receivable management. Earlier, it was okay to lose 1% or 2% here and there. But then with the current scenario, lowered interest rates, focus on receivables, delayed payments, etc., that 1-2% became a major factor. I think from product point of view, our focus has been to make sure that revenue leakage is also captured. So I would say configurability, ease of use, adaptive, dynamic, and above all, controls to help you manage your receivables better. I think those are the some of the points that we have been selling on, but that has become one of the biggest factors in this COVID scenario.
Thank you. That's very insightful. I think let's kind of continue on that, talking about the future. I mean, I think the digital agenda in the health plans is continuing to catch steam, and it's going to, it's there to stay, as we can all imagine. Let's talk about what is the future of healthcare billing, and where do we see that going? David, do you want to share some perspective on that?
Yeah, certainly from the payer side. I think I always get nervous when I walk into a health plan and they talk about claims billing as a commodity, because I'm like, yeah, clearly this person does not actually realize how complicated it is to get to do this stuff correctly. And I kind of think we've seen this evolution in claims systems, right, that have moved from, they were essentially just inventory management, right? So they made sure you knew where your claims were, but didn't really do anything with them. And now we've kind of are evolving through the transaction period, right, where they're highly configurable. They should, everybody's now focuses auto adjudication rates and how quickly they can process and how accurately. To me, sort of the future needs to be moving from sort of purely transactional focus. So the measure of success is how quickly something can be spit out and is it accurate, right? But now we have all of these medical economics products that sit outside that we have to pay for, that we pay a lot for, or we're hiring medical economists that are really running sort of standard analyses on claims data, sort of to best point, seeing spikes or decreases in utilization by certain revenue types, things like that. I think as we move forward, one of the things we're thinking about is how do billing systems begin to incorporate more of that smart analytics into them? So instead of just getting output sort of based on, days pended, claims paid within 30 days, denied within 60, like all of the metrics we all know, we're also beginning to see, without a lot of pull, but these systems really push out, where do we need to focus our energy, right? On a day-to-day basis, how do we know if something has changed, either something that was previously working well is now not, or something that we didn't ever know was a problem, and now we need to focus on it. And particularly as you look into more bundled payment models, risk-based payment models, and if you look at everything that CMMI and Medicare is pushing out, right? I mean, there is really this shift towards trying to engage sort of payers to move closer to the provider world and really start advocating for risk models. And I mean, most health plans, or many health plans, have never adjudicated a true capitated agreement, have never done capital reserving for individual partners versus the health plan overall. So I know that's complicated, and I think the analytics piece could come first. But ultimately, I mean, I think there needs to stay relevant, there needs to be a world where sort of all of those components of alternative payment models, analytics, but then still the core transaction speed and accuracy sort of are all captured. Beth?
That helps. Beth, would you like to add further?
Yeah, sure. I mean, when I think about billing from a commercial perspective, I mean, you got to have the basics from a digitalization perspective. You got to have the ability to take payments online. You've got to have bill presentment. And to David's point, you've got to have reporting availability and insight into the analytics. So, a good example is if a company purchases a disease management program, you need to have some dynamic information that's sharing with them. How is that program working? Basically, are they getting their money's worth out of that program? And what are the results with their population? So you definitely need to have insights into the analytics available from a digital perspective. And then, moving more into digital communications and stopping, the faxing and the snail mail, and move towards digital interactions between customers. I think it's just expected,
Absolutely. Akshay, would you like to further expand?
So actually, when David, you brought up the thing about the administrative services, etc. We were we were doing some surveys and we were reading through some of the research papers, And Tejas, you'll be surprised, like there's about $496 billion worth of spending by payers in the billing and insurance related BIR costs, right? And out of that, administrative excessive roughly amounts about $250 billion. So half of it is spent in the administrative things, right? And these are all backed into insurance premium. Now, if you look at it, like 50% of the calls today are actually related to billing. I've heard Beth talked about the services, right? The healthcare services. You're okay to pay the premium, right? If somebody came to me and say you have to pay another $1,000 to get the COVID injection, probably I'll agree today because I just want to fly. Okay. So I'll do that, right? So I think general consumer, many of there's an affordability part, there's a consumer part, and some of the people are okay to pay as long as they know what they are paying for, right? And I think that has led to and what David covered, there are three things I will say that highlight over here, right? One is the ready to use or how quickly can we get on board from a billing perspective. So we launched our SaaS practice, right? And by launching our SaaS, we actually offer 90-day trial period. We say, okay, any healthcare payer company can use our software for 90 days for free, right, on SaaS, and see how it can bring value to it, right? The other piece to that is um, when you look at from a future of billing point of view, right, there is a lot of complexity that we have talked about. There's a lot of variation that we have talked about. Talk from the perspective of when it goes to, as David mentioned, about the government plans, where you're not actually calculating the premiums, but it's more about the reconciliation, right, and making sure you're able to get the money that you ask for, right? When you go to ASO side of the fully funded, self-funded side of the equation, there's a different dynamics. You go into these health services where most of the payers are now getting either organically or inorganically. There is billing for those services. Now, from ORMB point of view, or our approach towards from Oracle point of view, is basically provide you an enterprise application through which you can not only do the fully funded, the self-funded government plans, as well as healthcare services, including PBMs, right? So as and when more and more convergence we will see in the market because of COVID, that is happening, so that the healthcare payers can provide end-to-end service. From our perspective, we do see more convergence on the billing side as well, to create the standard operating process so that the administrative cost goes down, right? You're not repeatable, you're not duplicating the effort. So those are the things that I would highlight from that perspective.
Sure, and I think just from my perspective, one thing that I see in the industry is the continued shift towards personalization, or N of one, where the days are not that far where a company will tell you that you have $1,000 to go spend on a healthcare platform. You go pick what parts of the plans you want. You have the ability to buy up on certain specific items, which will, in theory, it sounds great. I do believe the industry is going there. But if you think about it from a billing perspective, today we know that we're selling these two products to a certain group and they have X number of members. So the billing is number of members times the plan is the premium. But in a scenario where you have N of one customization, billing will get significantly more complicated because each member has a different premium that is getting owed by the company versus what you're now having to collect from them as well, right? So it's a hybrid of the individual as well as the group billing that we're doing. But I think that's where the industry is going, right? And the unbundling or rebundling, buy-ups as we live more and more in these subscription type services like HBO Max or anything else, right? That's to me where a lot of this is going, which is going to be exciting and complicating for all of us. I think let's kind of continue. So I know we talked about this a little bit, but when it comes to billing, consolidation across fully insured, self-funded government plans continues to be a challenge. And how do we continue to be more efficient when it comes to this? Beth, would you like to share a commercial perspective on that?
Sure. So at Anthem, and I'll start really with self-funded to start with. So at Anthem, we had 5 billing systems that was supporting our self-funded business. And this was several years ago. And so we were looking to move to a single system. And originally, when the work started to form, and keep in mind, this is across 14 markets and local markets, and then we had national. So if you think of it kind of like 15 stakeholders you're looking at, we unfortunately went down the path of almost boiling the ocean. We were trying to understand kind of what everybody needed, and then trying to say, okay, let's configure the system to get what everybody needs, which that went on for about a year and a half or so. And we were like, all right, time out. And so when I got involved, I said, let's start with the basic arrangement, and build that. And then let's get that business on the system. And then let's get to a more complicated scenario of a client. And then let's build that and then move that forward. And so we changed kind of our approach to do that. The other thing that we at first started to do, which was really, we started to move clients from our migration from the old system to the new system upon renewal, which, then I said, well, why can't we do it off renewal? It was very controversial about doing this, but I knew that if we waited for every renewal, it would be the slow boat. And we would be here forever trying to migrate. And I'm talking 5,000 clients that we were trying to migrate off of the 5 old systems. So we actually were able to pivot to not doing it upon renewal. And that actually was beneficial because we were not disrupting the client upon renewal. And we were doing it kind of in a quiet and more downtime, and able to do that. Plus, we were able to migrate clients a lot faster because we didn't have to wait upon renewal, because most of our renewals from a self-funded business is at 1/1. So we were able to do it a lot faster. The other thing that I would say is that we also focused on the 5 legacy systems. There was so much manual processing going on that we focused on how can we configure the new system so that we don't have to have the manual processes, or how can we automate or automate the processes. So we did a lot of that. And we basically made the process almost 50% more efficient. So I was able to bring down headcount that supports the billing process because of all the automation and configuration. The other thing that I would say, if anybody else is going through this, make sure you get key partners involved, whether it's your back end, like accounting, client reporting, payments, disbursement, treasury, and definitely underwriting involved. So make sure that you're understanding kind of the end-to-end process, both from the sale, the underwriting, all the way down to the back end, including, client reporting and all of that. And then the other thing is that we still struggle with, but is clearing the old platforms. So we've now been, so I said we started out with 5. We've now shut down 3 of the 5, but we still have some business lingering on the other 2. Shutting down those systems are super important, because you have back end processes that are still have to maintain those legacy systems. And so until you really shut them down, you're not being as efficient as you could be. And then the other thing is, making sure you get your users involved in the testing, and also having a feedback loop to be able to constantly get improvements and enhancements from the users, I think is super important.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing, Beth. David, insights for me?
Yeah, so I, having gone through several claims migration, system migrations, I agree 100% with what Beth said on every aspect. We actually transitioned at Clover from a BPO to an internal system about a year ago, live last November, so a little bit over a year. And what was interesting, what we found is as we were meeting with our CEO was very involved. He was very curious about this. And as we started sort of introducing him to concepts around edits and the kinds of edits you can set and rules you have to set about should you take one cost share, you go to a E&M visit, but they also take an X-ray or administered, should that be a second cost share because technically your bid says both of those services have, like all of those kinds of things. And he would get really angry and frustrated with us, right? Because he's a very rational person. And he's just like, this is so irrational. Like the conversation and the language you use to describe how to set up your claim system has nothing to do with the language you actually use to talk about care and treat, right? And made this point that they're very disconnected. So actually made us go through this exercise with certain edits that would be, he was like, I need you to describe to me like how this actually plays out. This thing that somebody's sending us a bill for, like what are the series of clinical things that occurred that resulted in this bill being sent? He's like, because if you can describe that, then it should be very clear, do we or don't we pay it? And much to all of our sort of embarrassment and chagrin, I guess, or his chagrin, it was frequently really difficult to do. And that could have to do with reference labs versus treatment labs. Like there's all kinds of different areas. So as we think about consolidation, I don't just think about the need to sort of consolidate within within different claim systems and sort of rolling out EasyCap and old systems and moving on to cloud-based new systems. I also think like to remove a lot of this waste you're talking about, Akshay, on the administrative side, like, and to answer, I read the question in the Q&A about sort of the provider and member experience is like, we've got to begin sort of building transaction systems for the future that sort of incorporate the entirety of the clinical experience, right? So how does your system more reflect your claim system, more reflect what the member and provider actually see and hold and experience, so that a lot of the mystery about how things are or frequently are not paid for is eliminated.
To add to David's point, from our perspective, consolidation is obviously related to cost reduction, and cost reduction means you're automatically, increasing your productivity as well as your profit margins, right? Which are very important. And what we are saying is, Tejas, that look, from the world of many of the corporates don't stay only on the fully funded plans, right? They are also buying self-funded plans for certain products and fully funded plans for certain products, right? Is there a point to maintain two billing systems for fully funded and self-funded? Then you have the whole transition between when you are from fully funded to Medicare, there is COBRA, etc., etc. The thing is, the important piece is also there is these processes are, there is a, how you build the customer, right? Once it has been coded and deciphered is very set pattern, right? That is where the commoditization starts. And I believe that strongly when we are there out in the market as experts working with likes of Deloitte, Tejas, we work very closely together. We get the market experts working with leading companies like Anthem with Beth, leading consulting with you, Tejas, from Deloitte perspective, right? We bring in those expertise, and then we have our own expertise that is going out there, and we draw the parallel to how you can centralize even the operations on that front, right? And that itself, right, not only it is reducing the administrative cost that we have talked about on many fronts, but consolidation also helps just become more nimble, right? You're in one place, you have central excellence, central of excellence, and you're working off that versus going to disparate systems trying to do different things to make things happen.
Yeah, and to your point, I forgot to mention this, is that so after we finish the self-funded migration, we're now working on the fully insured, and so bringing the ASO and the fully insured billing together. Kind of to your points, we have groups that go from fully insured to ASO, so we're flip-flopping between systems. So why not have it all in one place, so that you can manage both the clients and the processes together.
Absolutely. And one thing, Beth, you said that resonated with me is that it's important to shut off the old systems. Because more often than not, I've seen where we do go through these new platforms, we build them out, and there's still things that linger and the old platform remains. And it's so easy sometimes that you need to do something quick. Let's just put it on the old platform, right? And that trend continues, and you end up with actually larger technical debt than you actually started out in the beginning, right? So it's the last piece of turning it off, but it's an important win in this whole thing, right? Um, okay, well, we're gonna actually move to the next part. So when we talk about billing accuracy, is important, right? And data reconciliation, reconciliation in general, billing reconciliation, data mismatches continues to be issues that all of you, I'm sure, are seeing day to day, right? So what are you doing? What are some ways, techniques that you're leveraging to kind of solve those types of problems? So David, I mean, from a government standpoint, you want to talk about that first?
Yeah, and I think the unique challenge here from a government, Medicare and Medicaid, I'll stick with Medicare just sort of as writ large, is that you have a third party intermediary in everything you do. So it's a little bit different than with ASO and commercial, where it's essentially a payer provider or a payer employer sort of relationship. Is we've got a set of external rules that govern everything we do, right, and determine what we're going to ultimately get reimbursed, right, as our essentially, right, an MA plan is just a fully capitated plan, right? It's a risk bearing entity in that way, and sort of as we think about products and reconciliation, most plans will say they use a combination of manual audit and examination, and then vendors, right? Again, expensive vendors to manage things like COB, Medicare secondary payer, hospice, like all of these things that ultimately impact the revenue for a Medicare Advantage plan, that the government and premium revenue that the government will acknowledge they're frequently wrong. I mean, your monthly payments are almost never accurate, and you monitor and hope that over time and based on your appeal, they get sort of that 1 to 2. It's like that's the 1 to 2% for an MA plan, Akshay, right?
Yeah.
Is that they get closer, and that's just, we need to figure out sort of, one, have higher expectations for the government, right? There's a lot of money flowing through these programs and a low degree of accuracy. I don't know short term that we're going to expect a lot of change there. But as I think about sort of, or as I made comments about sort of developing products for the future that do more than just process transactions, right? It's again audit, pattern recognition, and sort of early warning, right? Like sort of like missile alarm systems, or fire alarm systems that begin to trigger for you. I mean, we'll see massive, and with Part D being an entirely other animal altogether that requires information about enrollment and attribution, there's so many ways to screw up sort of revenue streams for Medicare Advantage and attribution for Medicare Advantage. And it's really left a lot to human audit to catch and manage many of these things. So as I look at, an Oracle and other companies like that, that's sort of where we're looking, is like, right now we're paying folks, we're hiring workers, right, from BPOs in India and the Philippines to do this work because they're lower cost. Obviously, we'd like those kinds of companies to go one step further and be able to take the learnings from the kinds of stuff we're offshoring to them and actually begin building that back into the products that are being designed.
No, great point, David. Beth, would you like to share something further?
Yeah, so from a commercial perspective, one of the things that we experience is that we have some clients that are self-bill. And what, if you're not familiar with that, basically what the arrangement is, that they are the source of truth for their enrollment. So let's say we've got a company of 1,000 employees, then they will take that 1,000 and then they will pay us based on that 1,000. So that's good and that's bad. But so if we've got, let's say 900 membership in our system, and well, it's usually the other way around. Let's say we have 1,100 and they have 1,000, then we want to try to understand we obviously need to manage, the variance, because we can't be too far off. But over time, kind of like to David's point, yeah, at some point you get to it's close enough kind of thing. So we have had, people looking at its manual, situation of, we get in information from the client, we look at what we have, and we compare and say, okay, where are we off? And then we try to work with them. And so from a product perspective, this is when it's great, where we have an automated way to basically take what we've got, bump it up against the client, and basically spit out a variation that we can then have conversations with the client about, and using AI and things like that. Because when we get the data from the client, as you can imagine, the data we get from one client is not in the same format from the other client. So we're getting all kinds of formats from different clients, because they use different, systems themselves. So we can't expect them to all, send in the same format. Being able to do that analytics and figure out first name, last name, all that, and matching it up to our data to then figure out what our variance is, having that kind of product is super helpful.
I think, and to add to Beth's and David's point, Tejas, the products will become even better. What we are investing into is integrations, Oracle on Oracle integration, right, as much as possible. So providing integration with ERP to solve some of the problems that Beth are talking about, right? Be able to get their, able to get their employee information automatically, rather than somebody submitting it. There are ways in which we are trying to invest into integration to get more and more adaptability into different formats, etc. I think I'll tell you a story about this 1-2%, right? And this is my personal experience. So we were working with one of the largest healthcare companies out there, and they were doing a exercise to figure out how they can become efficient, and they were finding out that there is a lot of data mismatch of $1.50, $2 here and there, and there were a lot of time being spent to reconcile that stuff. And to manage that whole process, somebody wrote a rule to say, if the difference is within $2, write it off, right? That was something that was going on for years, and it was all working well. Efficiency ratio up, done. Objectives achieved, done. Very good. And then the legacy system started growing and throwing up all the stuff, right? And then we were brought in, and you'll be surprised. We changed that rule from $1 to $2 to actually, if the variation is within X%, right? And the amount of money that we found from that rule change actually paid for the entire project. So, because what we didn't realize, that whoever that put that rule didn't realize that there is a lot of small payments coming in. There were a lot of Medicare, Medicaid stuff that was going on. There were a lot of small payments that were there that were getting in that 1-2%. But once we fixed it within the first year, we got the payment off. And I think that is where I believe, right? Current reconciliation, data mismatching, all that stuff, if you look deep into it, it is a combination of individual skill set, right? What I know how to match this file or this format, and a combination of systematic rules, right? Then once I have interpreted that file, or I know there will be discrepancies in that area, then the system kicks in, right? And in that case, if that individual goes, that 1-2% keeps increasing, and there is another band-aid and another band-aid. Now, we do believe with, in moving away from combination of individual skills and systematic rules towards pattern-based matching, right? That is where AI and ML is helping us a lot. We are in process of launching a big reconciliation module based on AI and ML, where we will know for certain type of lockbox file, for certain type of payment files, for certain type of customer information, what is the pattern within which it should be processed, how to identify the anomaly, right? Month over month, quarter over quarter, not only in the terms of if somebody was supposed to be charged 5 fees or for 5 a premium was there, right? Was it charged, and what was the quantity, right? So there are two pieces. One is the completeness and the correctness. So finding those anomalies through AI, ML, I think that is where a lot of this reconciliation, data mismatch issue can be solved, and of course integration, right? That will be also a key defining factor.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, when you think about it, in a typical plan, your membership largely remains the same month over month. Over 95% of the membership doesn't really change,
Yeah.
right? So when you think about billing, I think there's absolutely ways you can apply AI models to look at and review bills, perhaps even before you're sending them out to reconcile. And if you see a bill that is more than X percentage higher or lower than the previous month, right, being able to take a look at it. Today, a lot of those types of things tend to happen manually. But
Yeah.
I think we live in a world where things are changing, where application of AI, machine learning models, better just safeguards within the system itself, right? Perhaps when it's actually, when the system generates the bill, it perhaps flags it to say, well, why is this bill 50% more than the month before when the membership has not changed that much, right?
Yeah.
What
And,
has changed that much, right?
yeah, and the whole traceability, right? Like uh, in this COVID, there were scenarios where, Beth mentioned, David mentioned, um, we had to implement the rules where delinquency couldn't take place as scheduled. We had to pause them, right? And eventually, some of them will actually go into proper aging even after the delinquency pause, because that is where it is. Some of the companies are really under the water to pay these bills, right? Um, that also leads to, if the traceability, auditability is not there, there's no systematic approach to all managing these receivables. That also leads to mismanagement, right? Now you are looking at not only multiple billing system, multiple processes, individual skill sets, systematic rules, and then you couple it up with environmental issues, the current ecosystem issues, and then this problem just becomes exponentially large than what you're anticipating.
Yeah, that's a great point. And what you were talking about just kind of struck me because someone was telling me this is probably like 9 months ago, and we kind of paused on the idea because of COVID. But there's a pattern. If you know that there's a company that's paid you on the 7th of the month every time without fail for the last 3 years, and you suddenly miss one payment, typically there's grace rules and other things that we have where you'll tend to ignore it and you won't actually catch that problem until month 3, 4, 5 and your collection increases. Again, the use of AI and other things, you can absolutely do pattern recognition to understand when a group is actually falling behind. Maybe there's proactive ways you can reach out to them, have a discussion around what's going on, right? But I mean, I think there's some exciting things that are coming in. We focus a lot on getting the bill out right. Of course, we want to focus on the money getting in, applying it, but how do you detect when something's wrong as well?
Yeah.
And
And Beth,
Tejas, the other,
yeah, Beth, you wanted to add something. Yeah.
I was just going to add, this may be kind of a basic kind of thing, but if you have policies and procedures that have certain business rules, you need to have a system that you can configure to administer those. In some of our legacy systems, we had policies, but the system didn't actually have the rules built in. So the actual behavior that was happening was way outside the policy. And we were having to monitor that manually. So having a system that, you actually can use configuration to administer your policies is really a requirement in my mind.
Absolutely. Akshay, anything to add?
No, I was just saying Beth wanted to say something. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'll go to the last question that I have, and then I would highly encourage folks to use the Q&A feature and share other questions you have as well. And this is actually, David, you mentioned this for a second around billing as a commodity versus a differentiator. And I personally feel like billing, if done right, is truly a differentiator and it can help you gain market share. Akshay, what's your perspective, and what are some things that truly does make it a differentiator? Anything?
No, absolutely. I think when we look at billing, right, billing actually covers few things underneath it, right? And that's why we at Oracle call it billing and revenue management, right? It is a big differentiator. So in current world, right, there are many themes that have come out. Couple of them is digitization, right? Digitization um, uh, has been one of the key factors. How do you make sure that you are able to reach out as the first responder to your needs, right? All this around mental health, telehealth, things are coming over there. Those things warrant for transparency and trust. Okay. Then the other thing that comes is as and when the digitization increases, right, the likes of Lemonade will come into play, right, where days of aggregation, where people will be able to say, okay, give me a requirement and I'll go out there and poll the best for you. And the whole, open enrollment, exchanges, etc., are coming up, right? Now, for these two areas, right, digitization and the world of aggregation, trust, transparency, it is very important to have ability to bill what you were quoted for, right? So that there is no discrepancies over there, right? That builds the transparency, that builds the trust. On the other hand side, when you become more and more digital, you need to be adaptive, you need to be dynamic. I talked about ease of configuration. You are able to launch more and more products much faster. You are able to sort of let, when I'm picking up a plan, days are not far away when I'll be say, okay, I want this in my plan and not this in my plan, and give me what would be my price, right? So those days are not away, but for that, you need to lay the solid foundation. And I strongly believe the reason why all this stuff leads down to billing is without a proper billing system, all digital strategies, all these aggregator strategies are very good looking, right? But there will be revenue projections, but no clear vision to revenue realization. Okay, we will be on dashboards and on and channels, etc. Sitting and talking about what we can do through the digitization, what investment we need to bring, but billing is the piece that brings in that money. And from that perspective, it is a clear differentiator from what you can do with the billing system through consolidation, through being nimble, through being dynamic, driving this digitization. And people have asked me, actually, you talk about digitization and billing, how do they relate, right? And I always share my experience. And I'm very certain that healthcare is not very far away from this journey. And I've talked about this in multiple webinars, right? Imagine today in this COVID scenario, you had to go to a car dealer and sit there and argue for 6 hours and buy a car versus going to a website and buying your Tesla, right? There is assurance that what you get, you get. There's no coupons, there's no offers, this is what you want, you get, right? So I think those are the pieces which make me believe that having a solid billing system is a key differentiator. Definite correlation to your margins, correlation to your revenue.
Absolutely, great point. Beth, would you like to add to this?
I think a billing system can add a differentiator, I think, both from a capabilities perspective and also pricing solutions. So what I mean by that is, when you think about capabilities, like one of the things that our clients sometimes struggle with is we'll send a bill, let's say at the first of every month, and then throughout the month, they're making changes to their enrollment. So people are leaving, people are coming, people are getting married, people are having babies, and that thing. Currently today, but we're looking for this to be implemented in the near future, is having real-time billing, so that if we bill that first of the month, and let's say they send in their enrollment file and there's a lot of changes to it, they'll be able to, the client will be able to basically on a portal be able to say, I just need a refresh bill, that will have their real-time enrollment transactions reflected, so that they don't have to say, well, I reduced my bill by $1,000 because, these two employees left or whatever it is. So I think having those kind of capabilities is a differentiator. From a pricing solution, I think having a billing system that is very configurable and very flexible allows you to have pricing solutions that are outside the normal and to meet the client where their needs are. And doing, even risk sharing in certain pricing arenas, giving that flexibility with a billing system makes that unique and outside the normal.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. David, anything from you to add?
Yeah, I'll go quick since I see we have a couple questions in there. For me, again, agree with everything that's said. The other thing that I think for the billing and payment side that will begin to add some differentiation is more real-time work. And so even if that's like provisional payments, but I think we definitely need for providers, and we've seen how fragile financially folks are. I mean, particularly PCPs and things like that during the early days of COVID. So there needs to be some sort of credit debit system for more real-time recognition of what you should get paid. Is there, sort of the integrated systems where you can put in the bill and see, is there anything obvious that's going to get rejected? But going back again to that question about members and providers getting kind of closer, more aligned around what things cost. I mean, there really needs to be some model where at the point of care, not necessarily in the office, but or in the doctor's office, but at the front office that day, you sort of have transparency into what the total cost of that experience is, even if you're not bearing the brunt of it, right? Even if the health plan's playing the most of it. But we just like until somehow you make the reality of what things cost and what people pay feel closer together, like there's just no motivation at the consumer level really to address medical cost.
That's a great point. David, while I have you, I do think there's a question that I would like to see if you can help answer. Considering the complex workflow and stakeholder mapping, utilization management, and referrals management, what process or pain would you like to see most addressed by solutions out there?
There's a lot of different ways to answer this. I think sort of there's no great integrated referral systems out there, right? Managing a referral process, it tends to be a headache and come off feeling pretty punitive to providers and members when you have one. But again, like on the claim side, I will say anything that helps simplify the data that's used, the reference data that's used, right? Because I mean, when we think about both utilization management and claims payment, you've got reference data, right? You've got member data, provider data. On claims, you have contract data. On UM, you have prior auth list data, Medicare approved services data. And there just hasn't been a great solution yet for being able to timely and accurately get that reference data updated in a more seamless way.
Yeah, great point. There's another one around MLR rebates, and Beth or David, either one of you can help chime in here. But how do you see MLR rebates having an impact on overall premium billing and revenue reconciliation?
So from a Medicare perspective, MLR rebates from dropping below the 85% statutory MLR don't get paid back, right? You can look historically. There are a number of ways to work around that, largely by how you're classifying what you put in as quality payment, like quality costs, quality improvement costs. So I think if you look historically, very, very few dollars have ever been paid back. This is going to be a unique year. So my guess is that there's actually going to be significant lobbying that the MLR, instead of being paid back, should be allowed to be kept essentially in escrow based on some as of yet unseen but potential surge in services that are going to come when all of these delayed services, elective services are finally occurring. So I find it unlikely it's actually going to have a particularly disruptive impact on the federal side of payment.
Yep. Beth, even from, I mean, a lot of the same rules apply on the ACA book, which is under you as well. Any perspectives that you want to share?
I don't really have any different feedback than what David shared. I think he's right about that.
Yeah, but yeah, you're right. It's a unique year, and I think there's a pent-up demand out there for services, which will likely go into next year. So more to come. I think there's one more question that I'll bring up to this group. Has COVID presented any unique challenges in tracking member MOOP? If so, what steps have you taken in improving this tracking? If not, what processes do you have in place that mitigate having tracking issues?
So Tejas, I'm assuming that's member out of pocket.
Yeah.
That's my assumption as well.
That's what that is.
Yeah.
We already had a process of tracking member out of pocket, so it was not really affected by COVID. We still have the ability to do that. I'm not aware of anything that was impacted by that.
Yeah, I would agree. It's not so much the tracking of it that I think has been the issue. It's more sort of making decisions on the fly about what cost shares you're going to apply to certain things. Like on the Medicare side, if you're paying the 20% COVID sort of bonus payment, if it's a service that's got a co-insurance, are you applying the co-insurance, that extra 20%, to some of the labs and different things? It's just sort of ambiguous about what the expectation was for what would be covered, what wouldn't be covered. So again, I think it's less the tracking and more just the trying to cover all your bases in terms of the decision making about how you want to administer the out of pockets.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and I think there's pairs. Each core admin system is unique. I've had clients that had no problems establishing kind of the COVID rules, and there's others that it's spent months writing several COBOL programs to figure that out, right? But we do have one more question, which I think we can cover as well. In future, is COVID vaccine covered under the payer and provider model of cost sharing? David, any perspective that you wanted to share?
So I've got some ideas about this. I mean, I think the early days, months, it's going to be function more like a military operation than a healthcare operation. I mean, it's going to be a massive deployment. I'm doubting there's going to be much, if any, cost applied to it. And then I think over time, it will just be, once the sort of emergent pandemic is managed, I think you just use the same pricing methodology that you would for other standard vaccinations.
Yeah,
I would agree with you, David. I think it'll evolve similar to like the flu vaccines over time.
Agreed.
Yep, makes sense. Again, I want to first thank all of you, Beth, David, Akshay. I think this was a very engaging conversation. Appreciate all the deep insights that all of you had brought in. I know I truly enjoyed the last hour. The health team, again, thank you for your help organizing this. I'm actually going to hand it back to you, and we can move forward to the next section.
Thank you, Tejas, and to all of our panelists. If you'd like to continue the conversation, please join us on Twitter. And now, please welcome Master Mixologist Natasha.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Natasha Soto-Alborz, and I am a New York-based mixologist. Most recently, I was at Motel Morris restaurant in Chelsea, where I designed their seasonal cocktail list. And now my husband and I have a cocktail business called Violet and Vine of New York on Instagram at Violet and Vine of NY. And we've been doing a lot of cocktail classes and different virtual events during the pandemic. So it's been a fun and interesting shift, teaching people how to bring mixology into their living room and get creative with their cocktail making. So today, for this happy hour, I am doing a cocktail and a mocktail for you. And I wanted to really incorporate a lot of those wintry flavors. So we're getting a little colder outside, which means we want to warm up a little bit with our drinks. They're still cold drinks, but they're really warming ingredients that I'm using. So the first cocktail I'm doing is called Our Cabin in the Woods. And I am making my own cinnamon infused bourbon for this. I think this is something, a great trick for you to have up your sleeve for the holidays. It's very easy. I know sometimes the thought of doing an infusion sounds like we're getting into a chemistry class and like should be better left to the experts, but I want to reassure you that it's actually very simple. And the great thing about doing an infusion is you can use it in a bunch of different drinks. So I used Buffalo Trace bourbon, which is a nice sort of middle price point bourbon. It's something that I can feel good about doing an infusion with. I might not want to do it with my highest end bourbon because that I want to preserve that really pure flavor. But here, this is something that I feel good about infusing some cinnamon into. So the way that I did my infusion, I took 1 cup of the bourbon. I didn't want to do the whole bottle, up to you. You can play with the proportions. But per cup of bourbon, I did 4 sticks of cinnamon. And those are just these whole cinnamon sticks that you can find at your local grocery store. I put that in a quart container and I let it sit for at least 24 hours. The cinnamon infuses really quickly. So depending on how intense you want that flavor to be, 24 hours is perfect. If you want to leave it for 48 to 72 hours, that would also work. Just know that it's going to start to get more intense. And if you let it go too long, it's actually going to get a little bit bitter, and we don't really want that. We just want that nice cinnamon flavor. So the result is my bourbon gets a little bit darker, more red in color, which is really fun for this drink. And basically, this is kind of my play on a Boulevardier. If you're a Negroni drinker, you're going to really like this drink. A Boulevardier is a Negroni that's made with bourbon instead of gin. So I'm taking it a step further, playing with some of the ingredients, and obviously, like I said, adding in the cinnamon. So I'm going to do 1 ounce of my cinnamon infused bourbon. And this is a stirred cocktail. The reason being that when we are using all spirits, we like to stir our cocktails so that we're actually not watering down the drink too much. We just want it nice and chilled. I'm also doing 1 ounce of Campari. Campari being a bitter orange spirit. Cinnamon and orange, as we know, are kind of like a classic wintry holiday sort of pairing, which is great. So that was 1 ounce of my Campari. Then I'm incorporating a little bit of Italian Amaro. Amaro is a digestif traditionally, but it's very good in cocktails. It's going to be a little bit bitter and a little bit sweet. So definitely this drink is on the balanced side between bitter and kind of caramely notes. I'm doing a 1/2 ounce of my Amaro. And then lastly, an ingredient that we're probably all fairly familiar with, which is Grand Marnier. So Grand Marnier being more in that cognac sort of family and having a nice intense orange flavor and a little bit of sweetness again, because I am using quite a few bitter elements. I want to make sure that the result is balanced and not leaning too far in either direction. So I have all of that in my glass little mixing pitcher here. If you don't have one of those, you could definitely use a mason jar, would be a great substitute, or a pint glass. I'm going to add my ice in. And I'm going to use my bartender's spoon to stir this. Stirring, I know, can be like a little intimidating when you haven't bartended before, but basically the long spoon helps you a lot. You're going to go right into the side of the glass. You're going to want to try to keep the spoon sort of edged against the rim of the glass as you stir. And you're going to use your fingers to just get like a swirling motion going there. It takes a little bit of practice. I'll admit, when I first started bartending, it wasn't the easiest thing in the world, but stick with it, it gets easier. And basically my goal here again is to just really chill down the drink. The same way I would if I was shaking. I just want to stir until the point that I can feel the glass is pretty cold in my hands. And I can already smell the cinnamon flavor coming through really nicely. It's really lovely. And that should just about do it for this. I'm going to use my strainer. And I'm going to go over a large ice cube for this drink. So I have these molds that are fairly easy for you to find for a home use. And they make a large ice cube. I have clean hands while I'm doing this. Make sure you do too, or use gloves if you're making it for guests. And then I'm going to put my strainer right in my mixing glass. Go right over this large ice cube. Beautiful. And I'm just going to hold it up for you so you can see that really gorgeous orange, kind of sunset, very holiday color that we have. For my garnish, I wanted to do something that's reminiscent of a hot toddy because the flavors in this drink kind of have that warming up by the fire feeling. So I've done a 1/2 orange slice and I've studded it with cloves. So you can sort of see there in the camera. And so the way you do that, when you get whole cloves, they actually are sort of shaped like little spears. And you can go straight into your citrus. So I just take the cloves and I pop them right into the spaces there. So when you see a hot toddy, people usually do this with lemon. Just a really fun, great looking garnish. I'm going to lay this right down on top of the drink. So again, I did a 1/2 orange slice. And then you have the completed Our Cabin in the Woods, which is really lovely. You have to taste it right to make sure that it's working well. Delicious. It's definitely got the cinnamon flavor coming through. I get a lot of the orange notes from the Campari and the Grand Marnier, which is what I'm looking for. So give that one a whirl. I think you'll really enjoy it. For my non-alcoholic cocktail, which I like to call a zero-proof cocktail, I really don't want to go boring with these because I think sometimes we get a little lazy when it comes to mocktails, and we don't need to. They can be just as interesting as any seasonal cocktail that incorporates spirits. I chose to go with my main interesting flavor that I'm using today is sage, which is really fun. So sage definitely reminds us sort of Thanksgiving, holiday meals, and it's a pretty aromatic herb. It definitely has a lot of bang for its buck, so we don't need a lot of it. What I did was I made a simple syrup with my sage. So I took 1 cup of sugar, 1 cup of water, I brought it to a boil, and then while it was still hot, I took it off the heat. I threw in about 5 leaves of sage. That's all you need, really. And when I say leaf, it's just that little guy right there, because the flavor is intense. I let that cool down. I strain out the leaves, and then I can store that in the fridge for 4 to 6 weeks. It's awesome in a gin gimlet if you're a gin drinker, but I'm using it in a mocktail today, like I said. So my mocktail is called Winter Wake Up Call, and I'm incorporating grapefruit, the sage syrup, and English breakfast tea, which is where I'm getting the name. So I'm using a black tea. I made traditional English breakfast tea, but I chilled it down in the fridge, which is really fun. And it has sort of a nice tannic, earthy, darker, intense flavor that's just gonna bring a little character to this non-alcoholic cocktail. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do 1.5 ounces of fresh grapefruit juice right into my shaker. Now this one is shaken because we're using citrus. Anytime we use citrus, we want to shake because we want that drink to be really well incorporated. And it just doesn't have that same effect if we were to stir something that has citrus. Then I'm also doing 1.5 ounces of my English breakfast tea. And again, just traditional tea bags that you can find at the grocery store. You can make as big of a batch as you want. It's really delicious iced on its own too. And then last but not least, my sage simple syrup. You can see how intense the color is there, which is really fun. I used natural cane sugar, so the color of it wasn't quite as light to begin with. And then when I added in the sage, it got an even darker color, which is great. And I'm just doing 1/2 ounce of this. Again, it's sugar. We want to be sparing with our sweetness so that the drink comes out balanced and not overly cloyingly sweet, which nobody really enjoys. So I have all of that in my shaker. I'm going to add my ice. If you don't have cocktail tools at home, don't worry about that. You can use a mason jar. Like I said, a mason jar for stirring. You can use a mason jar for shaking, and you would just put the lid right on it, and it would work really well. So I'm going to cover this, and I'm going to shake it pretty vigorously, get it nice and cold. That should do it. I'm going to double strain this. So I like to double strain things that I shake because that way the little ice crystals kind of get taken out of the equation. So this is a little mesh strainer. I'm going to use that to double strain here, right into a coupe glass. Coupe is sort of that fun, you can think of it as a Marie Antoinette era glass, or also you recognize it from The Great Gatsby as a popular glass for champagne in the 1920s and 1930s. We use them a lot now for cocktails because it's just a beautiful glass. So I have done on my coupe a 1/2 rim of sea salt. Just gives it really beautiful, almost looks like a dusting of snow going with that winter feeling. And then I have a sage leaf for garnish. I'm gonna clap that right between my hands. What that does is it releases the oils from the herb. Gives it a really, really bright fragrance when you bring the drink up to take a sip. And I'm gonna lay that right on top. And that is my winter wake up call. So again, completely non-alcoholic, really lovely. I like putting my mocktails in glassware that really feels like you get a spirit in it because again, it just sort of ups the presentation, ups the wow factor. This is really clean, it's lovely, it's very citrusy. And as a bonus, it is a little bit of a wake-up call because it has caffeine in the tea. So If you wanted to do this as like a brunch non-alcoholic drink, that would be perfect, but it's also really fun in the evenings. So those are our 2 cocktails for today. I hope you'll try them at home. If you take away one trick out of this entire thing, I'd love for you to do the cinnamon bourbon, because it's really gonna get you through all of the holiday season. It's great just over ice. It's also awesome if you combined it with something like apple cider, just in a tall glass, a little bit of ice. You could do a cinnamon stick for garnish, so you'll have a lot of fun with that. Again, I'm Natasha Soto Albors, and you can find me on Instagram at Violet and Vine of NY. Always happy to answer cocktail questions and share knowledge with you. I wish you all happy, healthy holidays and have a great evening. Cheers.
Thank you, Natasha, and to everyone for joining. Please have a great rest of your evening.